tonight sleep has not come. And that is okay. You are not broken. You are simply awake, lying here, in the dark, with a mind that has not yet found its resting place. Before the night is over, you will meet an old woman who watches leaves fall, a cobbler who learns to sit with silence, and a monkey who finally stops jumping. Not because anyone told it to, but because it was ready. Tonight, there is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to fix, nothing you need to understand. Just lie here and listen, and let the stories do what stories have always done. Carry you somewhere gentle. Before we begin, I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Feel free to share in the comments. And if these quiet stories help you find rest, a like or a subscribe means the world to this small channel. It helps others who cannot sleep find their way here too. Now, let us settle in together. These are not lessons to memorize or rules to follow. They are simply stories, invitations to rest. There is nothing you need to understand, nothing you need to remember. If your mind wanders while you listen, that is perfectly fine. If you drift away and come back and drift away again, that is fine too. The stories will still be here, moving gently beneath you. Like a current, you do not need to steer. You can close your eyes whenever you like. You can open them again if you wish. There are no instructions tonight, only stories, and the quiet spaces between them. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to receive what is offered here. These are not teachings in the way a classroom offers teachings. They are more like things whispered between old friends on a quiet porch. Observations about life, about struggle, about the strange and beautiful way human beings learn to let go. You do not need to believe anything. You do not need to agree with anything. You only need to listen. And if something lands softly inside you, let it stay. Tonight, we will explore some of the gentlest wisdom the world has ever known. Stories and teachings that have helped people rest a little easier for over 2,500 years. They come from a tradition that understood something very simple, that peace is not something you have to chase. It is something that arrives quietly and without announcement when you stop running, when you stop trying, when you finally let the night be the night and let yourself be exactly who you are inside it. So settle in now. Let your body grow heavy against whatever is holding you. Let the pillow take the weight of your head, all of it, the full weight of the day and every thought it carried. Take a slow, deep breath, not because you must, but because it feels good to breathe when no one is asking anything of you. And take another. Feel the way your chest rises and falls without effort. Your body already knows how to do this. It has been doing it your whole life. And one more. Let that breath carry out whatever it can. Whatever it cannot carry, we will leave for the stories. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. Tonight's journey is called When Sleep Won't Come, and it begins with a very simple truth that an old woman once shared with her neighbor on a night very much like this one. Let us begin. There is a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with the body. You know the kind. The body is heavy. The limbs are still. The pillow is right. The blanket is warm. Everything is exactly where it should be for sleep. And yet the mind will not stop. It flickers. It jumps. It picks up a thought you set down an hour ago and turns it over like a stone, looking for something underneath. It replays a conversation from Tuesday. It rewrites an email you already sent. It wonders whether you locked the back door, whether you said the wrong thing at dinner, whether the ache in your shoulder means something it probably does not mean. And just when you think you have settled one thought, another takes its place. Not louder, not more urgent, just next, always next. This is not a flaw. This is simply what minds do when the world goes quiet and there is nothing left to distract them. They fill the silence the only way they know how, with noise. And the noise is not meaningless. It is the sound of a mind that cares deeply, that has been paying attention all day, that is still trying to protect you, even now, even here, even when there is nothing to protect you from. And tonight, we are going to sit with that noise. Not to fix it, not to silence it, just to watch it. The way you might watch rain from a window, without needing to go outside and stand in it. In a house that sat at the edge of a small lake, there lived a woman who had once been a teacher. She had spent 31 years standing in front of classrooms, answering questions, organizing lessons, keeping time. She had been the kind of teacher who arrived first and left last, who memorized the names of siblings and knew which students needed lunch money on Fridays. And she had been good at it. The kind of good that no one notices because it looks effortless, but that costs everything behind the scenes. She had retired 3 years ago. Her daughter lived 2 states away and called on Sundays. Her husband had passed 5 years before that. A heart attack on an ordinary Wednesday, so sudden that the coffee he had been drinking was still warm when the ambulance came. And now the house was hers, just hers, with its creaking floors and its view of the lake and the old oak tree that dropped its leaves onto the porch every October like clockwork. The days were manageable. She read. She walked the path around the lake, nodding at the joggers and the mothers with strollers. She made soup on Sundays and froze half of it in small containers because there was no one else to share it with. She had taken up watercolors for 3 weeks, then quilting for 2, then given both up because they felt like assignments she was giving herself. And she had spent enough years grading those. But the nights were something else entirely. Every night, she would lie in bed with a quilt her mother had made, pulled up to her chin, and the moonlight would come through the curtain in a thin silver line, and the crickets would start their slow chorus outside. That rising and falling hum that should have been soothing, but somehow made the silence between each pulse feel deeper. She could smell the faint sweetness of dried leaves blowing against the porch, mixed with the chamomile tea she always drank before bed. The cup still warm on the nightstand, and she would close her eyes, and the mind would begin. Did I call Margaret back? I should have said something different to Laura. The faucet is dripping again. What if the roof leaks this winter? I never told my daughter about the savings account. I should write that down. Where did I put the notebook? Is the back door locked? Did I take the right pill this morning? Or did I take yesterday's twice? On and on it went. Not dramatic thoughts. Not emergencies. Just the ordinary hum of a life being reviewed by a mind that did not know how to stop reviewing. Like a teacher who cannot stop grading papers, even after the school has closed. She had tried everything. Warm milk, counting backward from 100. A podcast about ocean waves. Lavender on the pillow. A white noise machine that her daughter had sent with a note that said, "This changed my life, Mom." Nothing worked, not because the methods were wrong, but because the mind was not interested in being managed. It had spent 31 years managing others. It did not want to be managed itself. It wanted to be heard. One evening in late October, she walked down to the lake. The air was sharp and cold, the kind of cold that makes your nostrils sting and your eyes water, and your body suddenly remember that it is alive. The water was dark and perfectly still, so still that the reflection of the moon sat on its surface like a coin someone had placed there carefully. She stood there for a long time, her hands in the pockets of her late husband's jacket that she still wore because it smelled faintly of sawdust and the soap he had used, not thinking about anything in particular, when she noticed a light on in the house across the lake. The small stone cottage where an older woman lived. She had seen her before, white hair pulled back, slow deliberate walk, always outside in the early morning, doing something in the garden that never seemed to involve hurrying. They had never spoken more than a few words. But tonight, the older woman was sitting on her porch, wrapped in a wool blanket, looking at the sky as if it were saying something only she could hear. On an impulse she did not examine, she walked around the lake. It took 20 minutes. The path was uneven, and the moonlight threw long shadows across the roots that crossed it. When she arrived, the older woman looked up as if she had been expected, as if this visit was simply the next thing that was supposed to happen tonight. "You cannot sleep either," the older woman said. It was not a question. "My mind will not stop," she replied. She heard the frustration in her own voice and was embarrassed by it. "It just keeps going, like it is afraid that if it stops, it will miss something, like it is still grading papers." The older woman made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Come, sit. The chair is cold, but the blanket is not." She sat. The older woman poured her tea from a thermos, something that smelled like ginger and honey and wood. They sat together in silence for a moment. The lake was so still between them that the two houses seemed to float on it. Then the older woman pointed to the oak tree at the edge of her yard. Leaves were falling, slowly, one by one, catching the moonlight as they turned. Each leaf took its own path down. Some spiraled, some dropped straight, some caught a breath of wind and traveled sideways before finally letting go. "Do you see those leaves?" "Yes." "Do you try to stop them from falling?" She almost laughed. "No, of course not." "Do you stand under the tree and catch each one and examine it and ask it why it fell and whether it fell at the right time?" "No." "Then why do you try to stop your thoughts? Why do you catch each one and turn it over and ask it why it came?" The woman opened her mouth, then closed it. "There is an old teaching," the older woman said, "that the mind is unsteady, like a monkey, they say. Hard to check, hard to hold still. But the teaching does not say to catch the monkey. It does not say to cage it or scold it or tire it out. It says, the wise one shapes the mind gently, the way a fletcher shapes an arrow. Not by force, not overnight, by patience, by watching, by letting the wood tell you where it wants to bend, but the thoughts keep coming. Yes, like leaves, they will keep coming for as long as the tree is alive. That is not a problem, dear. That is simply autumn." The woman sat with this for a long time. She watched the leaves fall. She watched her thoughts rise. The faucet, the phone call, the savings account, the pill. And for the first time, she did not chase them. She did not try to answer them, or resolve them, or file them away. She let them fall. She let them land wherever they landed. And and she noticed that the ones she did not chase faded faster, like leaves that hit the ground and are carried off by wind. When she walked home around the lake, stepping carefully over the roots in the moonlight, the thoughts were still there. But they were quieter now, not because they had stopped, but because she had stopped arguing with them. She had stopped insisting they leave. And in that small surrender, something had shifted, not in the mind, but in her relationship to it. She was no longer the teacher, trying to quiet a noisy classroom. She was just a woman, sitting in the dark, watching leaves fall. She lay down. The quilt was cool, then warm. The moonlight moved slowly across the wall, painting a silver line that crept from the window toward the door. A leaf tapped against the glass outside and slid down with a sound like a fingertip on paper. She breathed. The pillow held her head. The crickets pulsed, and somewhere between, one breath, and the distance between her and her thoughts grew just wide enough for rest to slip in. Quiet, unannounced, like a guest who had been waiting at the door all along and only needed her to stop talking long enough to hear the knock. Tonight, if your mind is doing exactly this, jumping, flickering, reviewing, reaching, you are not doing anything wrong. You are not failing at sleep. You are simply a human being lying in the dark, with a mind that has spent all day protecting you and does not yet know that the day is over. The restless, agitated mind, the Buddha once observed, is hard to protect, hard to control. But he did not say it was broken. He did not say it was a punishment or a flaw. He compared it to a crooked arrow, something that can be shaped slowly, gently, with care. Not tonight, not by force, not by will, just by noticing, just by watching the thoughts rise and fall the way you might watch leaves spiral down from a tree you love. And what if noticing is enough? What if you do not need to straighten anything at all? What if you just need to see the arrow for what it is and set it down? There is a small story about a monkey that lived in a forest where the branches grew so close together that the canopy blocked out the stars. Every night, while the other animals slept, the deer folded in the ferns, the birds tucked into hollows, the insects gone silent in the cool, this monkey would leap from branch to branch, not because it was looking for food, not because anything was chasing it, but simply because that is what it had always done. Jumping was its language. Jumping was its way of being awake. It jumped from the mango tree to the fig tree, from the fig tree to the palm, from the palm back to the mango, over and over, all night long while the forest held its breath around it. The branches barely moved, the leaves barely rustled. It was that practiced, that habitual, a body doing the only thing it knew. One night, the monkey was very tired, more tired than usual, the kind of tired that lives not in the muscles, but in the bones. A tiredness that had been building. For so long it had become invisible, like a weight you carry, so constantly you forget you are carrying it. Its arms ached. Its fingers were sore from gripping. And somewhere between the fig tree and the palm, between one reach and the next, it simply stopped. Not on any special branch, not on the highest one or the safest one, or the most comfortable one. Just the one it happened to be holding when the tiredness finally became louder than the habit. It sat there on that ordinary branch and looked out at the forest for what felt like the first time. The moon was round and low, caught between two trunks, like a lantern left hanging. The air was cool and smelled of rain that had fallen hours ago and was now rising back up from the earth. The other branches were still there. It could see them. It could reach them. It could jump to any of them at any moment. But for the first time, it did not need to, and the forest, which had been so quiet all night, seemed to exhale around it, as if it too had been waiting for the monkey to stop. Thich Nhat Hanh once said that meditation can help us embrace our worries, our fear, our anger, and that is very healing. We let our own natural capacity of healing do the work. Perhaps that is what the monkey discovered. Not a technique, not a method, not a special branch or a better way of jumping, but simply a moment when the jumping was no longer necessary, when the tiredness was finally allowed to be what it was, when rest was not earned but simply arrived, because nothing was standing in its way. And perhaps that is available to you too, right now, not as something you must do, not as something you must understand or practice or achieve, but as something you can allow, the way you allow your body to sink into the mattress, the way you allow the pillow to hold your head, the way you allow the night to be dark without reaching for the light. In a town where the ocean was close enough to hear from any window, there lived a man who had spent his whole life making shoes. His hands were thick and scarred from years of cutting leather, stitching soles, hammering nails so small they disappeared between his fingers like seeds. He had been good at it, the kind of good that people drove 20 miles for, the kind of good that meant he never advertised because he never had to. His shop smelled of leather and wood polish and the metal tang of the tiny nails he kept in a jar by the window, and people said you could tell where his shop was just by breathing in from across the street. His wife had sat in that shop with him every afternoon for 42 years. She did not make shoes. She read. Sometimes she read aloud. Novels, newspapers, once an entire encyclopedia of birds, because she had found it at a yard sale for $2 and thought it was the funniest purchase she had ever made. He would work and she would read, and the afternoon would pass the way afternoons do, when two people have been together long enough that silence and speech carry the same weight. And neither one is a demand. She had died 14 months ago, a Tuesday in March. He remembered it was a Tuesday because the leather shipment had come that morning, and he had signed for it with one hand while holding his phone with the other, listening to the nurse say words that did not make sense yet. And he had almost not gone to the hospital because some part of him believed, for one terrible moment, that if he stayed in the shop and kept working, the words would not be true. Now the shop was closed. He had moved his bed into it because he could not sleep in the room they had shared. The room still smelled like her lotion, still had her reading glasses on the nightstand, still held the indent of her body in the mattress like a question that would never be answered. The tools still hung on the workshop walls, the hammers, the awls, the curved knives with wooden handles worn smooth by his grip. The workbench was pushed against the window. The leather smell had faded but not disappeared, mixing now with salt air that drifted in from the ocean 2 blocks away. Every night, he lay in the narrow bed he had set up where the cutting table used to be, and the silence came. Not the comfortable silence of two people reading in the same room. A silence with a floor and a ceiling, a silence you could furnish and live inside. This was a different silence, a raw silence, a silence that had weight and texture and temperature, a silence that pressed against his chest like a hand. And in that silence, his mind would begin its search. It would look for her voice, the way a dog looks for a scent it knows is nearby. It would replay the way she said his name when she wanted tea. Not the name itself, but the particular music of it, the rise on the first syllable, the softness on the second. It would reconstruct the sound of her turning a page, that small, crisp sound that he had heard 10,000 times and never once thought to memorize. It would reach for the particular rhythm of her breathing when she fell asleep before him, that soft, slightly uneven breath that had been the last sound he heard every night for 42 years. The sound that meant the day was finished. The sound that meant it was safe to rest. He was not trying to remember. The remembering happened on its own. Involuntary, relentless, a tide that came in every night and did not go out until morning. And the remembering was not painful exactly. It was more like hunger, a reaching for something that was not there, but that the body insisted should be. He tried to fill the silence. He left the radio on, tuned to a station that played old songs she would have known. He opened the window so the ocean was louder. He even talked to himself sometimes, narrating what he was doing the way she used to narrate what she was reading, his voice sounding strange and hollow in the empty shop. But the silence underneath was always there, patient, steady, waiting for him to stop covering it up. One night, very late, when the radio had turned to static and the ocean was just a low, constant hum, he stopped, not because he had found peace, not because he had decided to let go or accept or any of the things people told him he should do. He was simply too tired to keep filling. The filling took energy he no longer had, and so he lay there in the silence. And for the first time, he did not run from it. And the silence was not empty. He noticed that slowly, the way you notice dawn, not all at once, but in degrees, in shades, in the gradual appearance of things that were there, all along, but hidden by the dark. The silence held the echo of her reading voice, not the words. The words were gone, but the rhythm, the cadence, the way she paused at the end of a paragraph and took a breath before continuing, as if she were surfacing from water. It held the memory of her laugh when the encyclopedia described a bird called the magnificent frigate bird. She had repeated the name 6 times, each time with more delight, because she said it was the most absurd and wonderful thing she had ever heard. It held the weight of 42 years of afternoons, all of them, stacked together like pages in a book too thick to hold, but too precious to put down. The silence was not the absence of her. It was the shape she had left behind, a space that fit exactly what had been there, the way a casting holds the shape of what was poured into it, and he did not need to fill it. He could lie inside it, the way you lie inside a room that someone you love once lived in, and feel both the loss and the fullness at the same time, both the weight and the lightness, both the missing and the being found. He closed his eyes. The ocean breathed, a long, slow inhale, a pause, a long exhale. The silence breathed around him, not pressing now but holding, and he breathed with them, not comfortably, not easily, but willingly, like a man who has finally stopped swimming against the current and discovered that the water all along, had been trying to carry him. Perhaps tonight, the quiet around you feels a little too large. Perhaps the room is too still, or the sounds outside are too far away, or the space beside you holds something it did not used to hold, or no longer holds something it once did. You are not alone in this. Every person who has ever lain awake at night knows the particular weight of a room after midnight, when the world has gone somewhere you cannot follow, and you are left here, breathing, thinking, being. But here is something worth noticing. Right now, in this moment, your body is being held by the mattress, by the pillow, by whatever surface is beneath you. You did not have to earn that holding. You did not have to be calm enough, or good enough, or sleepy enough, or still enough. It is simply there, steady, patient, asking nothing in return. It has been holding you since the moment you lay down, and it will go on holding you whether you sleep or not. And if you listen, not for anything specific, not for an answer or a solution, just listen the way the cobbler finally listened to his silence, you might notice a sound you had not noticed before, the hum of a room at rest, the rhythm of your own breathing, which has been carrying on without your permission all this time, the faint, almost invisible pulse of your own heart, doing its quiet, faithful work without being asked, without being thanked, without needing to be told. It is doing enough. An old poet once wrote, "Put your thoughts to sleep. Do not let them cast a shadow over the moon of your heart." There is a word in the ancient Pali language, kapicita. It means, quite literally, having a monkey's mind. Fickle, restless, jumping from one branch of thought to the next without knowing why. But here is what is beautiful about this word. It is not a diagnosis. It is not a problem to be solved or a flaw to be corrected. It is simply a description. A gentle one, even. The mind jumps. That is what it does. The way a bird flies, the way water runs downhill, the way leaves fall from a tree in October without anyone telling them it is time. And knowing this, just this, nothing more, can be the beginning of the gentlest kind of rest. Not the rest that comes from forcing the mind to stop. Not the rest that comes from winning a battle against your own thoughts. But the rest that comes from no longer being surprised that the mind moves, from no longer treating its movement as evidence that something is wrong with you, from looking at the monkey and saying, gently, without frustration, "Ah, there you are. I see you. You can keep jumping if you need to. I will be here when you are ready to sit down. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow breath. Feel what has begun to soften in you since we started. Even if it is very small, even if it is only the space between one thought and the next, grown just a little wider than it was before. When you are ready, we will continue together. And the next part of our journey begins with something the mind does every night that is even more tiring than jumping. It holds on. It holds on to the day that has already ended, gripping it the way a hand grips a railing in the dark, and it will not let go. Not because it wants to keep the day, but because it does not yet know that the night is safe enough to fall into. The mind does something else at night that is even more exhausting than jumping. It holds on. It grips the day that has already ended. The conversations, the decisions, the things left undone. And it carries them into the dark like a traveler who refuses to set down a suitcase even after arriving home. Not because the suitcase is valuable, but because putting it down would mean admitting the journey is over. Take a breath. Let it come slowly. And let us sit with a woman who knew this kind of holding better than most. In a small town where the bakery was the first building you saw when you turned off the highway, there lived a woman who had spent 25 years making bread. Not the kind of bread that comes in plastic bags with labels. The kind you make with your hands. Flour and water and salt and thyme, shaped in the dark hours before dawn. So that by 6 in the morning, when the first customers came through the door, the whole street smelled of something warm and alive. Her bakery was narrow and deep, with a brick oven at the back that she had learned to read the way a sailor reads the wind. She knew its moods. When it ran hot on the left side, when the bottom rack needed an extra minute, when the wood was too green and the heat came uneven. The stainless steel counters had been scrubbed. So many times they had lost their shine in the places where her hands rested most. The floor was dusted with flour that no amount of sweeping could fully remove. It had settled into the cracks between the tiles years ago and become part of the building itself. On cold mornings, the windows fogged from the inside, and she would draw a small circle in the condensation to check whether it was still dark outside. Then turn back to the dough without waiting for the answer, because the answer did not matter. The bread had its own clock. Her hands told the story of those 25 years better than any words could. The knuckles were thick. The fingertips were rough and slightly cracked, especially in winter. There was a small scar on her left thumb from the year. The bread knife slipped, and she had wrapped it in a towel and kept working because there were 40 loaves to finish, and no one else to finish them. The flour lived under her nails permanently. She had stopped trying to scrub it out years ago. It was as much a part of her as her fingerprints. But tonight was the last night. The bakery was closing, not because the bread was bad or the customers had left, but because the rent had tripled and her knees could no longer take the 4 in the morning starts, and her daughter had said, gently but firmly, "Mom, it is time." And she knew her daughter was right. She knew it, the way you know the bread is done, not by the timer, but by the sound it makes when you tap it. A hollow sound, a finished sound. She had signed the papers that afternoon. The keys were in an envelope on the counter. Tomorrow someone else would walk through that door and see a room, just a room, with an oven and some counters and flour in the cracks. But tonight she could not leave. She had locked the front door at 6. She had swept the floor, slowly, the way she always did, starting from the back and working forward, the broom whispering against the tiles. She had wiped the counters with the same blue cloth she had used for years, folded into quarters, wrung out twice. She had turned off the oven and listened to it tick as it cooled, that familiar metallic ticking that had been the last sound of every workday for 25 years. A sound so constant that its absence would be louder than any noise. And then she had stood there in the middle of the dark bakery and not moved. The smell of vanilla and butter hung in the air like a guest who had not been told the party was over. Her daughter arrived at 8. "Mom, everything is off. The oven is cold. We can go." "I know. The keys are on the counter. You signed everything. There is nothing left to check." "I know." "Then why are you still standing here?" She looked at her daughter, and her daughter saw something in her face that made her stop talking. It was not sadness exactly. It was not grief or fear or regret. It was more like the expression of someone standing at the edge of a lake, trying to see the bottom, knowing the bottom is there, but unable to reach it with her eyes. "I keep thinking I forgot something," the woman said quietly. "I keep wanting to check the oven one more time, to make sure the gas is off, to wipe the counter one more pass. I know everything is done. I know there is nothing left to do. But my hands do not know that yet." Her daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down on the flour-dusted stool by the door. The stool where customers used to sit while they waited for their orders. The stool whose legs were uneven because one had been glued back on 3 times. "Maybe your hands are not checking the oven, Mom. Maybe they are just not ready to stop touching this place." The woman looked at her hands. 25 years of flour and heat and kneading had shaped them into instruments of a single purpose. And now that purpose was finished, and the hands were still reaching for it. Not because they needed to, but because reaching was the only thing they knew. The way a river still pushes toward the sea, even after the dam is built. Not because the sea is calling, but because the river has forgotten how to be still. She stood there for a long time. The streetlight outside painted a pale rectangle on the floor. A car passed, and the light shifted. Then she placed both palms flat on the stainless steel counter, the spot where she had shaped 10,000 loaves, where her handprints had worn the metal smooth, and she held them there. Not checking anything, not wiping anything, just touching, just saying goodbye, the only way her hands could. And then, slowly, she lifted them. She picked up the envelope with the keys. She walked to the door with her daughter, and she stood on the sidewalk in the cold November air and looked back through the glass at the dark room one last time. The oven was a shadow. The counter was a ghost. The flour in the cracks was invisible. She breathed. And the breath she let go was not just air. It was 25 years of mornings. An old forest monk once said, "If you let go a little, you will have a little happiness. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of happiness. If you let go completely, you will be free." He did not say letting go was easy. He did not say it happened all at once, or that it should not hurt. He simply observed that happiness and holding are opposites, that every gram of grip is a gram of weight, and every loosening, however small, is a lightening. The woman in the bakery was not letting go completely that night. She was letting go a little, enough to take her hands off the counter, enough to pick up the keys, enough to walk to the door with her daughter and stand on the sidewalk and look back without walking back in. And that little was enough. Not because the grief was gone, but because she had stopped pretending it should be. Thich Nhat Hanh once wrote that letting go gives us freedom. And freedom is the only condition for happiness. If in our heart we still cling to anything, anger, anxiety, or possessions, we cannot be free. Perhaps what he meant is not that we must release everything at once, but that each small releasing is its own kind of freedom. Each breath that carries something out, even if we cannot name what it carries, makes the chest a little lighter, the night a little softer, the distance between waking and sleeping a little shorter. Tonight, the day you have lived is already over. It ended hours ago, when the sun went down, when the lights were turned off, when the last conversation faded into quiet. But your mind may still be standing in the middle of it, hands on the counter, checking the oven one more time. Not because anything needs checking, but because the mind does not yet know that the day is safe to leave behind, that nothing will be lost by letting it go, that tomorrow will come whether or not you spend tonight holding on to today. You do not need to let go of everything. Just a little, just enough to feel the hands soften. In a garden on the side of a hill, where the wind always came from the west, there lived a woman who had been growing flowers for longer than most people had been alive. She was 78 years old, and her hands were the color of the earth she worked in, dark and lined and strong, in a way that had nothing to do with size. She wore the same wide-brimmed hat every day, faded from navy to a soft grey blue by years of sun, stained along the brim with sweat and rain, and the occasional splash of muddy water when the hose got away from her. She moved through her garden the way water moves through a familiar channel, slowly, surely, knowing every turn, every dip, every place where the current naturally slows. It was late in the season now. The last of the dahlias had dropped their petals, leaving behind bare stems that stood like small monuments to color that had already gone. The roses had browned at the edges and curled inward, as if trying to hold on to whatever warmth was left inside themselves. The ground was covered in a thin layer of fallen petals, pink and yellow and deep red, slowly turning to brown, slowly becoming soil again. The chrysanthemums were the last holdouts, their copper and gold still bright in the fading light. But even they had begun to lean heavy-headed toward the earth. The air smelled of earth after rain, and the faint, sweet decay of flowers, letting go of being flowers. That particular autumn scent that is both ending and beginning at the same time. Her granddaughter had come to help with the autumn cleanup. She was 12. With long arms and a serious face, and the kind of restless energy that made the old woman tired and grateful in equal measure. They worked side by side, the girl pulling dead stems with both hands, the grandmother cutting back the rose bushes with shears that had been sharpened so many times the blades were half their original width and thin as leaves themselves. "Grandma," the girl said, holding a dahlia stem, with a few dried petals still clinging to the top like passengers who had missed their stop. "Aren't you sad when the flowers die?" The old woman did not answer right away. She finished the cut she was making, a clean angle, just above the second node, the way her own grandmother had taught her 60 years ago, and set the shears down on the stone wall that bordered the upper beds. "Do you see this garden?" she asked. "Yes." "What do you see?" The girl looked around, turning slowly. Dead flowers, brown leaves, empty dirt. The grandmother smiled. Not the kind of smile that corrects, but the kind that remembers. "I see a garden that is resting. Every flower that was here did exactly what it came to do. It bloomed, it was seen, it fed the bees, and gave its color to anyone who walked past, whether they noticed or not. And now it is finished, not because it failed, but because it is done. And the done is just as important as the blooming, maybe more so. But it is so empty now. Empty is not the same as over. This soil is full of what those flowers left behind. Their roots are still here, under the ground, holding the earth together while the world above them sleeps. The seeds they dropped are already lying in the dirt, waiting. And in the spring, this exact spot, right here where you see nothing, will be thick with green, so bright it will hurt your eyes. but only if we clear what has finished. Only if we let the garden rest. She picked up a handful of dried petals and let them fall through her fingers, one by one, each catching the last of the afternoon light as it turned. An old teacher once said, "Do everything with a mind that lets go. Do not expect praise or reward." I think he was talking about gardens as much as anything else. You plant, you water, you watch the blooming with as much attention as you can give, and then you clear, not because you want to erase what was beautiful, but because clearing is how you make room for the next beautiful thing. The clearing is an act of faith, not an act of loss. The girl was quiet for a long time, pulling stems more gently now, as if she had begun to understand that what she was removing had once been alive and still deserved care in its going. When they finished, the garden was bare. The beds were turned, the dark earth exposed and gleaming faintly in the low light. The old stems were piled in the wheelbarrow, a tangle of brown that would become mulch by February. The two of them sat on the wooden bench at the top of the hill, the bench whose paint was peeling and whose slats held the warmth of the last sun, looking down at the cleared garden in the final light of the afternoon. The sun was low and orange and threw long shadows across the earth, and the emptiness of the garden did not look like absence. It looked like breath drawn in, like a pause between sentences, like the space between two notes that makes the music possible. "It looks peaceful," the girl said, surprised by her own words. "It is peaceful," the grandmother said. "It has done its work. Now it gets to sleep." The light faded. The shadows stretched until they covered everything. The garden lay still beneath them. Not empty, not sad, not over, just resting. The way a body rests after a long day, the way a field rests after a harvest, the way the earth itself rests between one turning and the next, gathering quietly for what it will become. There is a very short teaching that goes like this. Two people were walking through a forest. Early in the morning, one of them stumbled on a stone and fell. It was not a bad fall, a bruised knee, a scraped palm, a moment of surprise. They got up, dusted off their clothes, and kept walking. By evening, they had covered many miles. They had crossed a stream on stepping stones, climbed a ridge where the view opened up for miles, shared their lunch beneath a pine tree that smelled of warm resin and last night's rain. But as they sat by the fire that night, the one who had fallen said, "I still cannot believe that stone was there. It was right in the middle of the path. Someone should have moved it. I could have broken something. What kind of trail leaves stones like that, just lying in the way?" The other one listened, poking the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. Then she said, very gently, "You stumbled this morning. That was 12 hours ago. The stone is still on the trail, miles behind us. Your knee has healed, but you are still carrying the stone. When did you plan to set it down? Tonight. What are you still carrying from today? Not the big things. Those will take their own time, and that is all right. But the small stones, the word you wish you had not said, the email you forgot to send, the look on someone's face that you are still trying to read, turning it over in the dark like a photograph you cannot quite make out, the errand you did not run, the call you did not return, the small, persistent feeling that you should have done more, been more, handled the day a little better than you did. What if, with this breath, just this one, You could set down one of those stones. You do not need to choose which one. You do not need to name it, or examine it, or understand why you were carrying it. Just breathe out, slowly, and let the breath carry something with it. Anything, whatever it can hold, and trust that the trail behind you can hold the stones you leave on it. They are not going anywhere. They will still be there if you need them. But you do not need them tonight. There is a word for what the mind does when it will not set things down. The old Pali language calls it upadana, clinging. But the word is gentler than it sounds. It does not mean grasping desperately, the way a drowning person grips a rope. It means something closer to simply holding. The way your hand holds a cup of tea that went cold an hour ago. You are not gripping it fiercely. You are not afraid to let go. You have simply forgotten that you are still holding it. The tea is cold. The cup is heavier than it needs to be, and your hand has been wrapped around it for so long that it has forgotten it has the option of opening. Perhaps tonight, one finger at a time, you can begin to open. Not all the way, not all at once, just enough to feel the air between your palm and the cup. Just enough to remember that your hand knows how to be empty. That empty is not the same as lost. That setting something down is not the same as throwing it away. It is simply what hands do when they are finally ready to rest. Let us pause here for a moment. The garden is sleeping. The bakery is dark. The stone is still on the trail, miles behind you, and you are no longer on the trail. You are here, lying down, breathing, letting the night hold what the day could not. When you are ready, we will continue together. And the next thread of our journey begins with something heavier than the day itself. It is the weight of worry, not about what happened today, but about what might happen tomorrow. The mind's quiet habit of reaching into a future that has not yet arrived, borrowing trouble that does not yet exist, and carrying it back into tonight like a traveler who packs an umbrella for storms that may never come. There is a kind of weight the mind carries that is heavier than memory, heavier than regret. It is the weight of things that have not happened yet. The mind reaches into tomorrow, past the dark, past the morning, past the hours that have not yet unfolded. And it borrows trouble. It brings that trouble back to the pillow, like a gift no one asked for, and it sets it down beside you, and it says, "Here, carry this too." Take a slow breath. Let it out, and let us meet a woman who carried more than her share. In a quiet house on a street where the street lights buzzed faintly after midnight, a woman lay in bed. With her eyes open, she was 62 years old. She had raised 2 daughters, nursed her mother through the last years, taught Sunday school for a decade, and retired from the hospital where she had worked as a nurse for 30 years. Her hands knew how to take a pulse, how to hold a frightened patient's wrist, how to change a dressing without waking someone. Her hands knew how to be steady. But tonight, her hands were gripping the sheet. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed red. 2:47. She had been watching it since midnight, watching the numbers change with the slow inevitability of something that cannot be stopped. Her husband lay beside her, breathing the deep, even breath of someone who falls asleep the moment his head touches the pillow and does not surface again until the alarm. She had envied that ability for 40 years. Tonight, she resented it. Just a little, just enough to feel guilty about resenting it. The air conditioner hummed its low, constant note. The room was dark, except for the clock and a thin line of light under the bathroom door. Her chest felt tight, not the tightness of illness, which she would have recognized, but the tightness of holding, of bracing. The muscles across her shoulders had been clenched. For so long, they had forgotten they were clenched. Her jaw ached from pressing her teeth together. Without realizing, she was doing it. Her daughter had called that afternoon. The younger one. The one who lived 3 hours away with 2 children and a husband who had become, over the past year, a stranger in his own house. The daughter had not cried. She was not a crier, never had been, even as a child. But her voice had that particular flatness that the woman recognized from 30 years of nursing. The flatness of someone who has made a decision and is too tired to feel anything about it yet. "We are getting a divorce, Mum." And now the woman lay in the dark, and her mind was doing what it always did when someone she loved was hurting. It was making plans, elaborate, detailed, impossible plans. She would drive down this weekend. She would take the children for a month. She would find a lawyer. Her friend Margaret's son was a lawyer. She would fix the gutters on the daughter's house, because the daughter had mentioned they were leaking. She would cook, she would clean, she would hold everything together the way she had always held everything together, because that was what she did. That was who she was, the one who held. The plans multiplied. Each one spawned 3 more. The lawyer led to finances, which led to the children's school, which led to custody, which led to holidays, which led to the thought, unbidden, unwanted, but impossible to stop. What if the children blame themselves? And that thought was the one that sat on her chest like a stone and would not move. She picked up her phone at 6 in the morning and called her oldest friend, another grandmother, a woman who had walked a similar road 10 years ago, when her own son's marriage had ended. "Did you sleep?" her friend asked. "No. I was making plans. In my head. All night. I have a list. I have 17 things I need to do by Friday." Her friend was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you something that someone told me years ago that I did not want to hear? Yes, your daughter is a grown woman. She has made a decision that took courage you probably cannot imagine. And right now, the most important thing she needs from her mother is not a plan. It is not a lawyer or a cooked meal or fixed gutters. It is knowing that her mother is okay, that her mother still sleeps at night, that her mother's world did not collapse because hers shifted. She needs to see you standing. That is how you help, by still standing." The woman did not say anything for a long time. She could hear her friend breathing on the other end of the line. That patient, steady breath of someone who has learned this the hard way and is offering it gently, the way you offer an umbrella, not insisting, just holding it out. "I do not know how to stop making plans," she whispered. "You do not have to stop. You just have to notice that the plans are not helping you sleep. They are helping you feel like you are doing something. But lying in bed making lists is not doing something. It is worrying dressed up as action. And worry, my dear, worry is love with nowhere to go." That night, she lay in bed again. The clock glowed. The air conditioner hummed. Her husband breathed. And the plans came? They always came. But this time, she saw them for what they were. Not solutions, not action, just her love, pacing the hallway of her mind in the dark, looking for a door that would not open until morning. She did not stop the love. She did not stop the plans. She just stopped believing they were useful right now. At 2:47 in the morning, in the dark, she breathed. She let the plans walk the hallway, and she lay still, and the clock changed its numbers, and the tightness in her chest loosened. Not all the way, not completely, but enough that sleep could find a crack to slip through. The Buddha made a quiet observation, preserved for over 2,000 years. From craving springs grief. From craving springs fear. For one who is wholly free from craving, there is no grief. Whence then fear? He was not saying that love causes suffering. He was saying that when love becomes grasping, when it becomes the need to control what we cannot control, to fix what is not ours to fix, to protect the people we love from pain that is theirs to carry, then love turns into something heavier. It turns into worry. And worry, unlike love, does not nourish. It only weighs. Tonight, if you are lying here, with worry sitting on your chest, worry for a child, a partner, a friend, a parent, a version of the future that has not arrived, you are not weak. You are not anxious in a way that needs fixing. You are simply someone who loves deeply and does not yet know how to set that love down at the end of the day without feeling like you are abandoning it. You are not abandoning it. Love does not need you to carry it all night. It will still be there in the morning, ready to be picked up again. But it does not need to be carried through the dark. There is a small story about a woman who walked to the market on a summer morning. Before she left, she looked at the sky. There were no clouds. The sun was bright, but somewhere in the back of her mind a thought formed. What if it rains? She picked up her umbrella, a large one, heavy, the kind with a wooden handle that aches your wrist after a mile. She carried it the entire way, 4 miles along a dusty road, through fields of sunflowers, past a creek where children were swimming. The sun blazed, the sky stayed clear. Not a single drop of rain fell. When she arrived at the market, a friend looked at her and said, "You look exhausted." "I am," she said. The walk was so tiring today. But the walk had not changed. The road was the same road it had always been. The distance was the same distance. What had changed was the weight she had carried along it. The weight of a storm that never came. The umbrella had not protected her from rain. It had only made the sunshine heavier. In a fishing village where the houses leaned toward the water, as if they were listening to it, there lived a man who had spent 50 years on the sea. His face was carved by wind and salt. The deep lines around his eyes were not from laughing, though he laughed often enough, but from squinting at horizons for so long that his skin had memorized the expression. His hands were enormous and scarred, with knuckles that swelled in cold weather and fingernails that were always slightly torn because he never bothered trimming them properly. He had stopped fishing 10 years ago, not by choice, by weather. A storm had caught his boat 30 miles out, in the open water where the swells can build to the height of a house. He had survived, had not. He had clung to a piece of the hull for 4 hours until another vessel found him, hypothermic and silent, gripping the wood with hands so locked that the rescuers had to pry his fingers open, one by one. Now he lived on land. He mended nets for the younger fishermen, sitting on an overturned crate by the dock, his thick fingers moving through the mesh with the same patience he had once given to the sea. The dock smelled of brine and diesel, and the particular sweetness of fish scales drying in the sun. The wooden planks were grey and splintered, worn smooth in the places where people walked, and rough everywhere else. Ropes hung in coils from the cleats, creaking softly when the tide pulled at the boats. At sunset, the water turned the color of copper, and the boats rocked in their slips like sleeping animals. He was fine during the day. The nets kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. But at night, when the wind picked up, and in a coastal town, the wind always picks up at night, something in him would tighten. Not a thought exactly. Something older than thought. Something in the body. His chest would contract. His breathing would shorten. His hands, resting on the blanket, would begin to curl. Not around anything, just around the memory of gripping. The wind was not dangerous. He knew that. He was on land, in a house with walls, in a bed with a roof above it. The sea could not reach him here. But his body did not believe his mind. His body was still on the water, still gripping the hull, still waiting to be found. One evening, sitting on the dock after the other fishermen had gone home, he watched the waves come in. They were small waves, gentle, regular, the kind that barely made sound against the pilings. But he noticed something. The waves did not care that the storm was over. They kept coming, not because a storm was pushing them, but because that is what waves do. They are the echo of something that already happened. The storm passes, but the water remembers. The water keeps moving long after the cause of the movement is gone. And he thought, that is what my fear is. It is not the storm. The storm was 10 years ago. My fear is the wave that the storm left behind. It keeps rolling in. At night, when the wind blows, when I hear a sound that sounds like something it is not. And the wave is not dangerous. It cannot hurt me. It is just water, arriving at a shore, doing what water does. An old teacher once said that peace is within oneself, to be found in the same place as agitation and suffering. It is not found in a forest or on a hilltop, nor is it given by a teacher. Where you experience suffering, you can also find freedom from suffering. The old fisherman would not have used those words. He would have said it simpler. The fear and the calm live in the same body. You do not have to leave one to find the other. He sat on the dock until the sun was gone. The waves kept coming. The boats rocked. The ropes creaked. And he let the waves come. In his chest, in his breath, in the memory in his hands. Without gripping anything. Without trying to stop them. Without pretending the storm had never happened. He just let the water do what water does. Arrive, touch the shore, and pull back. Arrive, touch, pull back. The nets were folded beside him. The dock was empty. The first stars appeared over the water, faint at first, then steadier. He breathed with the waves, not because he was trying to, but because the rhythm was there, and his body had finally stopped fighting it. Tonight, if worry has followed you to bed, if your chest is tight, if your shoulders are braced, if your mind is reaching into tomorrow and pulling back storms that may never arrive, notice something. Notice the weight of your body on the mattress. Feel how gravity holds you, gently, completely without condition. That weight is real. That holding is real. And it is heavier than any worry you are carrying. The worry is air. The worry is a wave from a storm that is not here. But your body, this body, lying in this bed, breathing this breath. This is solid. This is now. This is sure. Thich Nhat Hanh observed that even if we take a sleeping pill, we continue to run, think, and worry in our dreams. The alternative medicine, he said, is mindful breathing. Not controlled breathing, not special breathing, just breathing and knowing that you are breathing. That is all. There is a word the old teachers used for what worry does inside the mind, papancha. It means proliferation. The mind takes one concern, a real one, perhaps, a valid one, and it multiplies it. One worry becomes 3, becomes 10, becomes a web so intricate that you cannot find the original thread. You started with your daughter's phone call and ended, somehow, at the question of whether you have been a good enough mother your entire life. You started with a doctor's appointment next week and ended at a future you have not been asked to live yet. Papancha is the mind's talent for turning a single raindrop into a flood. And the antidote is not cleverness. It is not figuring out which thoughts are real and which are invented. The antidote is simply noticing, there it is. The mind is proliferating again. And then, gently coming back to the body, coming back to the breath, coming back to the one thing that is actually happening right now, which is, you are lying here, you are breathing, and you are safe enough. Let us rest here. The waves are still coming, but they are smaller now. The fisherman is sitting on his dock. The woman has set down her plans, just for the night. The umbrella is leaning against the wall, closed, unnecessary. When you are ready, we will continue together. And the next part of our journey turns inward, not to what the mind carries from the day or borrows from tomorrow, but to something it whispers to itself in the quiet. A whisper that sounds like a question, but feels like a verdict. Am I enough? Have I done enough? Have I been enough? There is a question that visits many of us in the dark. Not always in words. Sometimes it arrives as a feeling. A tightness behind the ribs. A restlessness that has no name. A sense that the day you lived was not quite the day you were supposed to live. And if you listen closely enough, the feeling sharpens into something like a whisper. Was that enough? Was I enough? When was the last time you said to yourself, without hesitation, without qualification, I have done enough today? Not, I should have done more. Not tomorrow, I will do better. Just enough. This is enough. I am enough. For most of us, that word is the hardest one in any language. Not because we do not understand it, but because we have been trained, slowly, over decades, to believe that enough is the same as giving up, that contentment is the same as settling, that resting is what you earn after you have finished, and the finishing never comes. But tonight we are going to sit with that word, and we are going to start with something very small. There is a rice bowl sitting on a shelf somewhere in the world right now. It is not a beautiful bowl. It is not hand-painted or signed by an artist or displayed in a glass case. It is a simple bowl, clay, round, glazed in a color that might once have been green but has faded to something closer to stone. It has a small chip on the rim from the time it was dropped years ago, and someone picked it up and kept using it because the chip did not change what the bowl could do. The bowl does not try to be a vase. It does not compare itself to the porcelain plate beside it, the one with the gold edge that comes out only at holidays. It does not wonder whether it should have been taller or wider. or made of finer clay. It holds rice. That is what it was made to do. And it does that one thing completely, without apology, without ambition, without the quiet anxiety of wondering whether holding rice is important enough. And perhaps there is something to learn from a bowl. Not a lesson, just a noticing that the bowl does not suffer from being a bowl, that its simplicity is not a limitation, that enough for the bowl is not a compromise. It is the whole story. In a small apartment on the 4th floor of a building that overlooked a park, there lived a woman who had spent 30 years taking care of other people. She had been a nurse, the kind who worked the night shift because someone had to, the kind who held hands during the hours when the hospital was quiet and the fear was loud. She knew the sound of every machine in the ward. She knew which beep meant wait and which beep meant run. She knew how to talk to someone who was frightened without making it worse, that particular of saying very little in exactly the right tone, which is harder than saying a lot. She had retired 2 years ago. Her son had taken a job across the country. A good job, the kind of opportunity you do not turn down. And he called every Wednesday and every Sunday like clockwork. And she told him she was fine. And he believed her because he needed to. The apartment was small but warm. She had arranged it carefully. The reading chair by the window where the morning light came in. The small table set for one with a cloth placemat she changed every week. The framed photographs on the shelf above the television. On the nightstand beside her bed, she kept a candle that smelled of vanilla and a book she was always meaning to finish. In the corner of the closet, there was a box, a shoe box, the kind with a lid that does not quite fit, that she had not opened in years. The nights were when it came, not the loneliness. She had made peace with solitude, or at least an uneasy truce. What came at night was the measuring, the quiet, relentless inventory of a life held up against the life she had imagined. At 25, she had planned to write a book. At 30, she had planned to travel to Europe. At 40, she had planned to learn the piano. There was a second-hand upright in her sister's garage that she had never gone to pick up. At 50, she had stopped planning and started working double shifts. And the years between 50 and 60 had passed the way highway miles pass at night, quickly, blurred, counted only in retrospect. And now, at 58, she lay in bed in the glow of the vanilla candle and asked herself, what did I do? What did I actually do with this life? The answer, when she let herself hear it, always sounded small. I worked, I raised a boy, I took care of people, I made soup on Sundays. I called my mother every morning until there was no one to call. These were not the answers she had imagined giving at 25. These were not the answers that would fill a book or a passport or a concert hall. These were just a life. An ordinary life, an ordinary, unremarkable, small life. One night, unable to sleep and tired of the measuring, she got up and opened the closet. She reached for the shoebox, the one she had not touched in years, and brought it back to bed. The lid was dusty. The cardboard was soft with age. Inside were letters, not many, 8 or 9, written on hospital stationery, on notebook paper, on the back of a get well card. Letters from patients, letters she had received over the years, and put away, because she did not know what to do with them. She opened the first one. The handwriting was shaky. An old man's hand, she remembered now, a man who had been in the ward for 3 weeks after a fall. Dear nurse, I do not remember your name, but I remember your hands. You held my hand the night I was sure I was going to die, and you did not tell me I was wrong, and you did not tell me I was right. You just held on. I have thought about that night many times since. I want you to know that your hands were enough. She read another and another. A woman who wrote, "You brought me warm socks at 3 in the morning without me asking. I have never forgotten." A teenager who wrote years later, "You told me that being scared did not mean I was weak. I still carry that." She sat on the bed with the letters spread around her like fallen leaves, and the vanilla candle flickered, and the light from the street lamp outside made small patterns on the ceiling, and something in her chest that had been wound tight for years began, very slowly, to unwind. She had been measuring her life against a ruler that did not exist. The book she had not written, the countries she had not visited, the piano she had not played. She had been comparing herself to a version of herself that had never lived. A phantom, a projection, a woman made entirely of intentions that had never had to survive contact with real life. And, in the meantime, while she was busy not being that woman, she had been holding hands at 3 in the morning. She had been bringing warm socks. She had been enough the whole time. And she had not noticed because she was too busy looking at everything she was not. Pema Chodron once wrote that meditation practice is not about trying to throw ourselves away and become something better. It is about befriending who we are already. Perhaps that is what the letters gave her. Not a new self, not a better self, just permission to see the self she already was. The one who had been enough all along, whose hands had done enough, whose life, ordinary as it was, had left marks that other people still carried years later. Tonight, if a voice in you is asking whether you have done enough, whether you have been enough, whether your life has been enough, let us sit with that question without answering it, not because the answer does not matter, but because the question itself might be the wrong one. What if the problem is not that you have not done enough? What if the problem is that you have been using someone else's ruler? What if the ruler itself is the thing that needs to be set down? In a house at the end of a street where the afternoon light came in from the west, an old woman sat at a sewing machine that was older than most of her neighbors. She was 75, and she had been sewing for so long that the machine was as much a part of her body as her hands, an extension of her fingers, a second heartbeat in the room. The machine was the color of cream, with gold lettering on the side that had worn away to shadows. The needle moved with a sound like a small, patient bird tapping at a window. Tap, 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 steady, unhurried, certain. Her living room was small and warm and full of thread. Spools of every color lined the shelf above the window, ruby and sage, and a blue so dark it was almost black, and a yellow that made you think of dandelions, whether you wanted to or not. Scraps of fabric lay folded in baskets by the wall. The air smelled of cotton and green tea and the faint, sweet scent of ironing. That warm, flat smell that belongs only to fabric that has been pressed smooth. She did not sew for money anymore. She sewed because the neighbors brought things. A hem that had come undone, a button missing from a winter coat, a tear in a child's backpack that the child insisted was fine, but the mother knew was not. She fixed them all, charged nothing, and sent them home with the garments folded neatly in brown paper, as if they were gifts. Her granddaughter visited on Saturdays. She was 17, restless in the way that 17-year-olds are, always looking at her phone, always half somewhere else, always quietly convinced that life was happening in a place she had not yet found. "Grandma," she said one Saturday, watching the needle move through a sleeve, "don't you get bored doing the same thing every day? Sewing and tea and more sewing?" The old woman did not look up from the fabric. Her fingers guided the cloth the way a river guides a leaf, with no effort and total authority. "Do you think the needle gets bored?" she asked. The girl frowned. "That is not the same thing." "Why not?" "The needle goes in, comes out, goes in, comes out. Every stitch is the same motion. But every stitch is also different. Different thread, different fabric, different place where the cloth needs holding together." "Is that boring?" "But don't you want more? Don't you want to, I don't know, travel or do something big?" The old woman stopped the machine. She looked at her granddaughter over the tops of her reading glasses, the kind of look that is not judging but simply seeing, clearly and completely. "More of what?" she said. "I have a needle. I have thread. I have someone who needs a hem fixed and a cup of tea that is still warm. What exactly is the more that I am missing?" An old teacher once said, "Remember, you do not meditate to get anything, but to get rid of things. We do it not with desire, but with letting go." But perhaps the old woman was not doing anything as grand as meditating, but she had gotten rid of something that most of us carry without knowing it. The belief that what she had was not enough. The belief that life should be louder, busier, bigger, more. She had set that belief down the way she set down her shears at the end of the day, simply, without ceremony, because she no longer needed it. The girl was quiet for a long time. She put her phone on the table. She watched the needle move, in, out, and the fabric slide through her grandmother's hands like water, through fingers that know exactly how to hold it. The afternoon light shifted across the cloth, turning the white cotton to gold, and the machine tapped its patient rhythm, and the tea cooled on the table between them, and neither of them reached for it, because neither of them needed anything other than what was already here. Right now, you are lying here, you are breathing, your body is resting on something that is holding you without being asked. And that, all of that, is enough. Not almost enough. Not enough for now, just enough. The way a breath is enough. The way a heartbeat is enough. Not because nothing else matters, but because right now, in this moment, nothing else is needed. There is a word in the old Pali language, santuti. It means contentment, but it does not mean what we often think contentment means. It does not mean giving up. It does not mean settling for less. It does not mean pretending that pain does not hurt or that loss does not matter. It means something much simpler and much harder. It means stopping the war with the present moment. It means sitting down in the chair and finally, letting your back rest against it. You have been sitting on the edge of the chair your whole life, leaning forward, bracing, ready to stand up and run toward the next thing. Santuti is the moment you lean back. Not because the next thing does not exist, but because this thing, this breath, this body, this night, is already here, already whole, already enough. And perhaps, just for tonight, you can lean back Just a little, just enough to feel the support that has been there all along, waiting for you to trust it. Let us rest here. The seamstress is sewing. The nurse is holding her letters. The rice bowl is sitting on its shelf, complete, and you are here, breathing, being. Nothing more and nothing less than exactly what you are. When you are ready, we will continue together, and the next thread of our journey goes somewhere that takes courage to follow. Into the things the heart carries not because it wants to, but because it does not know how to set them down. The old regrets, the words we wish we could take back, the quiet, persistent ache of wishing we had done something differently. Tonight, we will sit with forgiveness. Not the grand, dramatic kind, but the small, quiet kind. The kind that begins in the dark, alone with no audience but your own tired heart. There is something the heart carries that is heavier than worry, heavier than doubt, heavier even than grief. It is the weight of the thing you wish you could undo. The word you said in anger that landed harder than you meant it to. The moment you were not there when someone needed you to be. The silence that stretched too long until the person on the other side of it was gone. And the silence became permanent. Take a breath. This part of the journey asks for gentleness. Not from you toward the world, but from you toward yourself. In a house where the hallway was lined with photographs that spanned 5 decades. A woman lay in bed with her eyes on the ceiling. She was 64 years old. She had taught high school English for 32 years. She had read Hamlet out loud to over 1,000 teenagers. She had memorized more poems than she could count and forgotten most of them. And the ones she remembered were always the ones about loss. The photographs in the hallway told a story she could not bear to walk past at night. Her wedding, her daughter's first steps, a Christmas where everyone was still alive, and at the far end near the bathroom, a photograph of her mother, taken 6 months before she died, standing in her garden with a handful of tomatoes, and a smile that had no idea what was coming. On the nightstand beside the bed was a wooden box, dark walnut, the size of a bread loaf, with a brass clasp that had turned green with age. Inside were photographs and letters, and a few small things that had no value to anyone but her. A button from her mother's coat, a recipe card written in her mother's handwriting, a ticket stub from a concert they had gone to together 30 years ago. She had not opened the box in months. She did not need to open it. She knew every item by heart. The moonlight came through the window in a thin crescent, not enough to read by, but enough to see the shape of the box, the outline of the furniture, the familiar geography of a room she had slept in for 20 years. The house was silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of wood settling. The air smelled faintly of the lavender sachets she kept in the dresser drawer, and beneath that, older, fainter, the ghost of her mother's perfume, which she sometimes imagined she could still detect in the hallway, years after it should have faded. Every night, the same scene played. Not every detail. The mind was merciful enough to blur some of the edges, but the core of it, the skeleton, the part that could not be softened. It had been a Tuesday. She had driven to her mother's house to help with the garden. A simple visit. But somewhere between the tomatoes and the roses, they had argued. About what? She could barely remember. Something about the daughter's parenting, something about boundaries, something that started small and grew the way fires grow when the wind changes direction. She had said things, her mother had said things. The kind of things that live in the space between people who love each other too much and know each other too well. She had left without saying goodbye. She had driven home with the radio too loud, gripping the steering wheel, telling herself she would call tomorrow. Tomorrow, she would apologize. Tomorrow, they would laugh about it, the way they always laughed about their arguments. Her mother would say something dry and funny, and she would roll her eyes, and they would move on because that was what they did. That was how they loved. But tomorrow, her mother had a stroke. And 3 weeks later, in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and institutional flowers, her mother died. And the last real conversation they ever had was the one in the garden, with the tomatoes on the ground and the words still hanging in the air like smoke. She had never said she was sorry. She had said it to the hospital bed. She had said it to the photograph in the hallway. She had said it to the wooden box on the nightstand. But she had never said it to her mother. Not when her mother could hear it. Not when it could have landed where it needed to land. And so every night, the mind replayed. Not to torture her. She understood that now. The mind replayed. Because it was still looking for the moment where she could have done it differently. Still scanning the scene for the exit she missed. The pause where she could have stopped and turned around and walked back through the garden and said, "I am sorry. I did not mean it. You are the most important person in my life, and I am sorry." One night, very late, she turned on the bedside lamp and opened the box. She took out a photograph, her mother in the garden, tomatoes in hand, smiling, and she held it. Then she reached for a pen and a piece of paper, and she wrote. She wrote to her mother, not a letter that would be sent, not a letter that needed an answer, just words put down on paper because they had been circling inside her for too long and they needed somewhere to land. She wrote, "I am sorry I left that day without saying goodbye. I am sorry I let the argument be the last thing between us. I am sorry I thought I had more time. I thought we had forever, and we did not, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. But I am tired, Mum. I am tired of carrying it as punishment. I want to carry it as love instead. I want to remember the argument and the garden and the tomatoes on the ground, and I want to let it be what it was, a Tuesday. A bad Tuesday, not the summary of our whole life together. Just one Tuesday out of 1,000. She folded the letter. She placed it inside the box between the photograph and the recipe card. She closed the lid. The brass clasp clicked shut. A small, definitive sound, like a period at the end of a sentence. She had not forgiven herself. Not entirely. Not the way people describe forgiveness in books. A moment of release. A weight lifted. A burden dissolved. It was smaller than that. She had simply decided, for tonight, to stop using the memory as a weapon against herself. To let the letter hold the words so that her mind did not have to. To close the box and let the box do the carrying. The moonlight shifted on the wall. The house settled. She lay back on the pillow and breathed, and the breath was not light, but it was lighter than it had been an hour ago, and that was enough. There is an ancient teaching that compares holding on to resentment to grasping a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned, the teaching says. But what they do not often mention is that sometimes The person we are holding the coal for is ourselves. Sometimes we are gripping it, not to throw it at anyone, but simply because we believe we deserve to be burned, because the burning feels like accountability, because setting it down feels too much like saying it does not matter. And it does matter. It mattered then and it matters now. But burning is not the same as caring, and pain is not the same as penance. And setting down the coal does not mean the fire never happened. It only means your hand can finally begin to heal. Pema Chodron wrote that having compassion starts and ends with having compassion for all those unwanted parts of ourselves, all those imperfections that we do not even want to look at. Compassion is not some kind of self-improvement project or ideal that we are trying to live up to. Perhaps the hardest place to be gentle is with the version of yourself that got it wrong, the version that said the cruel thing, the version that was not there, the version that knew better and did it anyway. That version of you is not a stranger. She is you on a bad Tuesday, being human. Tonight, if there is an old conversation you keep replaying, words you said that you cannot unsay, a moment you missed that you cannot return to, you are not stuck. You are holding on. And there is a difference. Being stuck means you cannot move. Holding on means you are choosing not to. And a choice, even one made out of habit, can be unmade. Not tonight, perhaps. Not all at once. But the awareness that you are holding is itself the first loosening. You cannot open a fist you do not know is closed. In a neighborhood where the houses were built close together and the gardens were small, but tended with the kind of care that comes from having very little space and wanting it to matter, there lived a man who had once built things. He was 70 years old, and his body remembered every wall he had raised and every foundation he had poured. Remembered them in the shoulders, in the lower back, in the knees that predicted rain 2 days before it came. His hands were square and rough, the nails permanently short from decades of catching them on things, the skin across his knuckles thick as canvas. His garden was behind the house, a patch of earth no bigger than a living room, bordered by a wooden fence he had built himself when he moved in after the divorce. Not his divorce, his son's, or rather, the divorce between himself and his son, which had no papers and no lawyers and no formal ending, just a slow withdrawal that began when the boy was 16, and his father was working 70-hour weeks, and the distance between them grew so wide that by the time he noticed it, the boy had become a man, and the man did not return his calls. The garden at night was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if the plants and the soil and the small wooden bench had agreed to hold still. The porch light cast a yellow circle on the grass, and beyond it the dark was soft, not sharp. The kind of dark that holds things rather than hiding them. He could smell the fresh earth where he had been digging that afternoon. A deep mineral scent, alive with the promise of things that had not yet surfaced. The mint plant by the fence sent its sharp green fragrance whenever the breeze touched it. He had planted a tree last spring, a plum tree, not because his son loved plums, though he had, as a child, eaten them by the handful until his fingers were stained purple and his mother had to scrub the juice from his shirt. He planted it because he needed to put something in the ground that would grow, whether he was there to see it or not. Something that would be here, whether his son ever came back or not. His neighbor, an old woman who had lived on the street for 40 years and knew everyone's story without ever being told, leaned over the fence one evening while he was watering. "You water that tree like it owes you something," she said. He smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "I water it because it is thirsty, and the rest, the digging, the fertilizing, the talking to it when you think no one is listening." He set the hose down. The water pooled around the base of the young tree, soaking into the dark earth. "My son is not coming back," he said. "Not because I did something unforgivable, but because I was not there. I was building other people's houses and I was not in mine, and he has every right to be angry." The neighbor nodded. She did not offer comfort. She did not say it would be all right. She said, "You cannot undo what happened. I know. You cannot build your way out of it. You cannot pour a new foundation over the old one and pretend the cracks were never there. I know. Then what are you doing in the garden?" He looked at the tree, thin-trunked, barely taller than his waist, its few leaves catching the last of the porch light. "I am planting something that will be here, whether he comes or not. I am taking care of something that does not ask me to explain why I was absent. I am not trying to earn anything. I am just growing something. Because I still remember how." The neighbor was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That might be the most honest thing anyone on this street has ever said to me." He watered the tree every evening after that. He did not wait for his son to call. He did not rehearse apologies in his head or compose letters he would never send. He just watered the tree. He watched the leaves multiply. He sat on the bench in the dark after the watering was done and looked up at the stars. The same stars his son could see wherever he was. The same sky stretched above them both, holding nothing and hiding nothing. He did not know if the tree would bear fruit. He did not know if his son would ever sit on this bench, but the tree was growing, and the garden was tended, and his hands, which had once built walls and poured foundations and carried everything, except the things that mattered most, had found something they could hold without gripping. There is a story about two people who were both wronged by the same person. The wrong was real, not imagined, not exaggerated, not the kind of hurt that fades with time on its own. It was a deep cut, the kind that changes the shape of a life. One of them carried the anger for 30 years. She rehearsed it daily. What was said, what was done, what should have happened instead. The anger became a room she lived in, familiar and close, with walls she had built from the same bricks the other person had thrown. She knew every brick by heart. The other one set it down. Not immediately, not easily, not because the hurt did not matter, or because she was a better person. She set it down because she was tired, because the weight of it was changing the shape of her own days, because she noticed one morning that she could not remember what the person looked like anymore, but she could still feel the anger as if it had happened yesterday. And that gap between the fading face and the sharp ache was the thing that finally made her open her hands. 30 years later, someone asked them both about what had happened. The one who had held on spoke for an hour, every detail intact, every wound still fresh. The one who had let go paused and then said, "I cannot remember their name." She was not lying. She had not erased the memory. She had simply stopped feeding it. And without feeding, the memory had done what all unfed things do. It had grown quiet. and then small, and then it had taken its place among the other things that had happened in a long life. No louder than any of them, no sharper, no more demanding of her attention. Dogen, the great Zen teacher, once wrote, "To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things." Perhaps forgiveness is a kind of forgetting, not of the event, but of the version of yourself that believes it must be defined by the event. Not the forgetting of amnesia, but the forgetting of release. The way you forget the weight of a backpack after you set it down. The shoulders still remember, but the body is free. Tonight, if your hands are holding something old, a regret, a grudge, a memory that has been running on repeat, for so long it has worn a groove in your mind, you might try something very small. You might notice your hands, wherever they are right now. Are they open or closed? Are the fingers curled or resting? You do not need to change anything. You do not need to forgive anyone. Not tonight, not unless you are ready. Just notice, just feel the fingers and the palms and the small muscles in the backs of your hands and ask yourself, is this hand holding something? And if it is, can it hold it a little more loosely? Not drop it, not throw it away. Just loosen the grip. One finger at a time, one breath at a time. There is a word for this kind of patience, khanti. In the old Pali, it means forbearance, the willingness to bear what is difficult without breaking. But there is something else inside the word that is easy to miss. Khanti is not a single act. It is a daily practice, not the dramatic moment of forgiveness that the movies show. The embrace, the tears, the music swelling. But the quiet, ordinary decision made again each morning to set the weight down for another day, to carry it a little more gently, to let the groove in the mind grow a little shallower, not all at once, but one night at a time. You do not have to forgive tonight. You only have to rest. Let us pause here. The letter is in the box. The tree is growing in the garden. The woman who let go has forgotten a name she no longer needs. And you are here, breathing, with hands that are learning, slowly, gently, at their own pace, how to open. When you are ready, we will continue together. And the next part of our journey carries a strange kind of comfort. The comfort of knowing that everything changes, that nothing stays the same, that the pain you are carrying tonight is not permanent, because nothing is permanent. Not the hurt, not the regret, not even this sleepless night. Everything passes, and in that passing, there is a kind of mercy that the mind, in its gripping, sometimes forgets to notice. Everything changes. You already know this, not because someone taught it to you, but because you have lived it. You have watched children grow taller than you. You have watched seasons turn the same tree 4 different colors. You have watched the face in the mirror become someone you did not expect. And you have kept looking anyway. You know, in your bones, that nothing stays. And tonight, that knowing can be a comfort, because this sleepless night, this restless, turning too long night, is also not permanent. It is already passing, one breath at a time. In a house that no longer belonged to her, a woman walked from room to room in the dark. She was 60 years old. And she had lived in this house for 30 of those years. Longer than she had lived anywhere else. Longer than she had been a wife, or a mother, or a librarian. Though she had been all 3 within these walls. Tomorrow, the new owners would arrive with their furniture, and their children, and their plans for the kitchen. They would paint the walls a different color. They would pull up the carpet she had chosen when her daughter was 3 and prone to falling. They would take down the curtain rod in the bedroom, the one her husband had installed the weekend before his first diagnosis, drilling into the plaster with the quiet concentration of a man who did not yet know what was coming. But tonight, the house was empty. The movers had taken everything that morning. What remained was space. Raw, echoing space that smelled of old paint and bare wood, and the particular absence that comes when a room has been stripped of everything that made it a room. She walked the hallway in her socks. Her footsteps sounded larger than they should have, bouncing off walls that had nothing to absorb them. She ran her hand along the plaster, cool and slightly rough, and felt the small bump where a nail had been driven in to hold a photograph of her daughter's graduation. The photograph was in a box in the car. The nail was still here, embedded in the wall, holding nothing. In the kitchen, the moonlight came through the window above the sink, the window she had looked through 10,000 times while washing dishes, watching the oya tree in the backyard change with the seasons. The countertop was bare. The stove was cold. The refrigerator had been unplugged, and its door stood open, a dark mouth with nothing left to say. She could smell the ghost of every meal she had ever made here. Garlic and onion, and the sweet, heavy scent of bread rising on Sunday mornings, layered one on top of another like pages in a book. In the living room, she found the place on the wall where the family portrait had hung for 20 years. The paint behind it was a shade darker than the rest, a perfect rectangle of the original color, preserved by the frame, untouched by sun or time. Everything around it had faded, but this one patch remained exactly as it had been the day they moved in. A window into the past, framed by the present. She stood there for a long time, looking at the rectangle of unfaded paint, and she thought, this house has been changing every single day. Every day the sun came through and faded the walls a little more. Every day the floors settled a fraction of a millimeter. Every day a child's handprint was added or wiped away. A scratch appeared on the doorframe. A hinge loosened, a window fogged. She had lived here for 30 years, and she had never lived in the same house twice. The house she moved into was not the house she was leaving. It had been becoming something else the entire time. Slowly, invisibly, the way a river changes its banks so gradually that you only notice when you look at photographs from years ago and realize the bend is in a different place. The craving to hold on, the old teachings say, grows like a creeper, slowly, silently, wrapping itself around whatever is nearest until the thing it holds is hidden beneath the vine. She had been wrapping herself around this house for 30 years, and now the creeper was being unwound, and beneath it was not loss. Beneath it was the house as it actually was, a structure, a shelter, a place that had held her while she became who she was. It had done its work, and its work, like all work, had an ending. She sat down on the bare floor of the living room, her back against the wall, right beneath the unfaded rectangle. The floor was cold through her jeans. The moonlight lay on the boards like a white cloth, and she let the house be what it was, not hers, not theirs, not anyone's. Just a house, just wood and plaster and glass, just a place where 30 years of living had happened, and where 30 more years of different living would happen after she was gone. It was not sad. It was not happy. It was just true. And the truth, tonight, was lighter than she had expected. Shunryu Suzuki, the Zen teacher who brought his quiet practice across the Pacific and offered it to a restless country, once observed, "Without accepting the fact that everything changes, we cannot find perfect composure." But unfortunately, although it is true, it is difficult for us to accept it. Because we cannot accept the truth of transience, we suffer. Perhaps what he meant is this: the suffering is not in the changing. The suffering is in the insisting that things should stay. The house was never permanent. The garden was never permanent. The face in the mirror was never permanent. And when we stop asking them to be, when we let them move and shift and become the way they were always going to, something unexpected happens. A kind of composure arrives. Not the composure of controlling everything, the composure of riding the current, of being carried by the very thing we were trying to stop. Tonight, whatever is changing in your life, whatever is ending or beginning or shifting beneath you in ways you cannot yet see, it is not a mistake. It is not a punishment. It is simply what life does. It moves, and you are moving with it, whether you feel it or not. There is a river somewhere. It does not matter where, because all rivers teach the same lesson. This river does not hold its water. Every drop that touches the bank touches it only once, then slides downstream, replaced by another drop, and another, and another. The river never grasps. It never says, "This water is mine. I will keep it." It lets every drop pass through, and it remains. Not because it is empty, because it is always being filled. The river exists not in spite of the letting go, but because of it. If it held on, if it dammed itself, if it gripped every drop and refused to release, it would become a pond. Still, stagnant, no longer a river at all. It is the releasing that gives it its shape, its sound, its life. And perhaps you are like that too. Perhaps the things that have passed through you, the years, the loves, the homes, the people, have not left you empty. They have given you your shape. They have carved the banks of who you are. And the current that flows through you now, this night, this breath, is not less real because it will pass. It is real precisely because it is passing. In a valley where the rice grew thick in summer and the fields turned gold by September, a woman of 80 years stood at the edge of her land and looked out at the last of the harvest. The stalks had been cut that morning. The field was a stubble of pale gold against dark earth, stretching to the tree line where the hills began. The air smelled of cut straw and wet soil, and the faint sweetness of grain that was already beginning to dry. Her grandson stood beside her, a young man, broad-shouldered, with hands that were still learning to be gentle with things that grow. He had been helping with the harvest since he was old enough to hold a blade, but this year he had been distracted. The weather reports worried him. The older farmers had been talking about drought. He had spent the week studying soil charts and rainfall data on his phone, trying to predict what could not be predicted. "What if next year is worse?" he asked, not looking at her, looking at the field as if it owed him an answer. "What if the rains do not come? What if we lose everything?" The old woman did not answer immediately. She reached down and picked up a stalk of cut rice, one that the machine had missed, lying flat against the earth. She turned it in her fingers, feeling the dry husk, the hollow stem. "How many harvests do you think I have seen?" she asked. "I do not know. 50, 60, 60 harvests. And do you know how many of them were the same? He waited none, not one. Some years the rain came early, and the rice was tall. Some years the rain came late, and the rice was short. Some years the insects ate half the field before we could stop them. One year, you were too young to remember. The river flooded and took everything. And I stood right here, on this exact spot, and watched the water carry away a year's work in a single afternoon. And you were not afraid. I was terrified, but I came back the next spring and I planted again. And the rice grew. Not the same rice, not the same field, really. The flood had changed the soil, moved the minerals around, deposited new earth from upstream. The field I planted in was not the field I had lost. It was something new, and it gave us one of the best harvests we ever had. She set the stalk down on the earth. That is why I still wake up each morning. Not because I know what will happen, because I do not. 60 harvests and I have never once known what the next one would bring. And that not knowing is not something to be afraid of. It is the reason the whole thing is worth doing. The grandson was quiet. The wind moved across the cut field, bending the stubble in soft waves that looked like breathing. A bird called from the tree line, a single clear note that hung in the air and faded. The sun touched the ridge and began to sink. The sky turned the color of ripe plums, deep purple at the edges, gold at the center, and between them a shade of red that had no name and would never appear exactly this way again. The old woman and her grandson stood at the edge of the field and watched the light change, and neither of them reached for it or tried to hold it. And it was beautiful, and it passed. Dogen, who spent his life watching the world with the kind of attention that most of us reserve for emergencies, wrote, "Each moment is all being. Each moment is the entire world." Perhaps what he meant is that this moment, right now, this breath, this heartbeat, is not a fragment of something larger. It is the whole thing, complete, entire, not a preview of tomorrow or a leftover of today. Just this. And this breath you are breathing right now, it has never happened before. No breath in the history of your body has been exactly this breath, with this air, at this temperature, in this room, after this particular day, and it will never happen again. It is the only one of its kind, and it is enough, not because it is special, but because it is here. There is a word the old teachers used for this, anicca, impermanence. It is one of the oldest observations in the Buddhist tradition, that nothing stays, that everything arises and passes away, that the only constant is the changing itself. But anicca is not a warning. It is not the universe telling you to brace yourself for loss. It is something gentler than that. It is the quiet reassurance that whatever you are feeling right now, the restlessness, the wakefulness, the ache, the worry, is also passing. It is already passing. It has been passing since the moment it arrived. You do not need to fight it, or fix it, or push it away. You only need to let it move through you, the way water moves through a river, the way light moves across a field, the way this night is already, even now, even as you listen, moving toward morning. Let us rest here for a moment. The house is empty, but the walls still stand. The river is flowing. The field is bare, and the old woman is watching the sky change colors she has never seen before and will never see again. And you are here, breathing a breath that belongs only to this moment, in a night that is already becoming something else. When you are ready, we will continue together, and the last thread of our journey is perhaps the simplest of all. It does not ask you to understand anything, or forgive anything, or let go of anything. It only asks you to be here, to lie in this bed, in this body, on this night, and to let that be enough. Not the beginning of something, not the end of something, just this, just here, just now. We spend so much of our lives becoming someone, becoming something, becoming better, stronger, wiser, calmer, more productive, more patient, more worthy of the life we think we are supposed to be living. The becoming starts early, before we can name it, and it does not stop. It follows us through decades of work and love and loss, whispering its quiet insistence. Not enough. Keep going. You are not there yet. But tonight, right now, in this bed, in this dark, there is nowhere to go. There is nothing to become. The to-do list is closed. The day is finished. The becoming can wait until morning. And what is left when the becoming stops is simply this: you lying here, breathing, being, just being. An old poet once wrote, "Though we seem to be sleeping, there is an inner wakefulness that directs the dream and will eventually startle us back to the truth of who we are." Perhaps that is what tonight is. Not a failure to sleep, but a quiet wakefulness, a chance to be still without needing a reason for the stillness. There is a very old story, so old that no one remembers who told it first, about a traveler who had been walking for a very long time. She had crossed mountains and rivers and deserts. She had worn out 3 pairs of shoes. And one evening, exhausted, she sat down at the edge of a village and asked the first person she saw, "Please, what must I do to find peace?" The villager, who was sitting on a low wall eating an apple, looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Have you tried stopping?" "Stopping what?" "Looking." The traveler opened her mouth to argue. She had been looking because peace was somewhere ahead, because it had to be, because every teacher she had met had pointed down the road and said, "Keep going." But something in the villager's face made her pause. He was not wise looking. He was not a monk or a sage or a teacher. He was just a man eating an apple on a wall. And he looked. She searched for the word. He looked at ease. Not happy, exactly. Not enlightened, just at ease. As if he had nowhere else to be, and that fact did not bother him at all. She sat down beside him. She did not find peace that evening, but she stopped looking for it. And that, it turned out, was closer to peace than anything she had found on the road. In a house at the end of a quiet street, a woman sat on her front porch in a rocking chair that had belonged to her mother. She was 56 years old, and until 3 months ago, she had been an accountant. Not the kind who loves numbers, the kind who is good at them, which is not the same thing. She had been good at schedules and deadlines, and the particular satisfaction of a spreadsheet that balances to the penny. She had been good at being needed. The early retirement had been her idea. Her body had started sending signals, the kind you can ignore at 40 but not at 56. Headaches that lasted days. A tremor in her right hand that appeared during tax season and did not leave when tax season ended. A tiredness that sleep did not touch. Her doctor had said the word burnout, and she had almost laughed, because burnout was something that happened to people who worked in emergency rooms, not people who reconciled accounts. But here she was, 3 months into a life with no spreadsheets, no deadlines, no inbox, and the emptiness was louder than she had expected. The porch looked out over a small garden she had been meaning to tend. Weeds had taken over the flower beds, and the fence needed painting. And there was a birdhouse that had fallen from its hook last winter and was still lying on its side in the grass. She had added all of these to a to-do list, then realized, with a shock that felt like vertigo, that the to-do list was the problem. She was trying to fill the emptiness with tasks. She was trying to become someone who had a porch and a garden and a purpose, instead of simply being someone who was sitting on a porch. The evening was warm. The rocking chair creaked on the boards, a slow, rhythmic sound that she had heard her mother make for years and had never paid attention to. The garden was dark now, the weeds invisible, the fallen birdhouse just a shape in the grass. The sky was deep blue turning to black, and the first stars were appearing. Hesitant, like guests arriving at a party they were not sure they had been invited to. And then she heard it. The crickets, not one, hundreds, maybe thousands. A rising and falling chorus that surrounded the house from every direction. She had lived here for 8 years. She had sat on this porch dozens of times, and she had never, not once, heard the crickets. Not because they were not there, because she had always been thinking about something else. The next deadline, the next task, the next thing she needed to become. She sat very still. The chair stopped rocking. The crickets sang. The air smelled of cut grass and the jasmine that grew along the fence. A scent she had also never noticed, sweet and heavy and completely useless, offering nothing except itself. Her hands rested on the wooden arms of the chair, palms down, fingers open. She was not meditating. She was not being mindful. She was not doing anything that had a name, or a method, or a step-by-step guide. She was just sitting. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, that was not a problem. Shunryu Suzuki wrote that in the Zazen posture, your mind and body have great power to accept things as they are, whether agreeable or disagreeable. But perhaps you do not need a Zazen posture. Perhaps a rocking chair will do. Perhaps a bed will do. Perhaps lying here, tonight, with no ambition and no agenda and no plan for what the next moment should look like, is its own kind of accepting. Not the accepting that comes from defeat, the accepting that comes from finally arriving at the place you have been standing in all along. When was the last time you did nothing, truly nothing, and let that be enough? Not rest as a reward, not stillness as a strategy, not quiet as preparation for more noise. Just nothing, just the sound of your own breathing, and the feel of the air, and the weight of your body, and the dark, asking nothing of you, offering nothing except itself. It may have been a very long time. It may have been never, but it is available to you now. It costs nothing. It requires nothing. It is simply what remains when you stop adding. On a narrow street, where a small temple stood between a grocer and a house with blue shutters, an old woman came every morning to sit in the courtyard. She was 82 years old. She was not a nun. She was not a Buddhist. At least not in any way she would have described. She was just a woman who had lived next door to the temple for so long that the courtyard felt like an extension of her kitchen. The courtyard was paved with flat grey stones, worn smooth by generations of sandaled feet. A single tree grew in the corner, a plum tree, old and gnarled, that bloomed white in spring and dropped its fruit in summer, with soft, wet sounds that startled the birds. The morning fog came in from the river 2 blocks away, and on most mornings, it filled the courtyard like a bowl of milk, so thick that the temple bell, when it rang, seemed to come from inside the fog rather than above it. She arrived each morning before the monks began their chanting. She brought nothing, no mat, no book, no prayer beads. She sat on the stone bench beneath the plum tree, the cold of the stone seeping through her cotton pants, the fog settling on her hair and her eyelashes like a second skin. She sat, and she breathed, and she watched the fog thin. That was all. She had been doing this for 11 years, since her husband died, and the mornings became too quiet to spend alone in the kitchen. One morning, a young monk, new to the temple, eager, still carrying the particular intensity of someone who believes enlightenment is a destination, saw her sitting on the bench and approached. "Forgive me," he said, bowing slightly. "I have seen you here many mornings. What method of meditation do you practice?" She looked up at him. Her face was deeply lined, the kind of face that has been shaped by weather and decades of expression, and her eyes were clear and unhurried. "I do not meditate," she said. The monk frowned. "But you sit here every morning, for hours." "Yes, I sit. The birds come, the fog lifts. I drink my tea when I get home. Then I do whatever the day asks of me." "But what are you doing while you sit?" She considered this. A bird landed on the plum branch above them and tilted its head, as if it too were waiting for the answer. "I am sitting," she said. And then, because she could see he was not satisfied, "I am listening to the birds. I am feeling the cold on the bench. I am watching the fog. I am being here. That is all." The monk stood there for a long moment. He had read the texts. He had practiced the techniques. He had counted his breaths and labeled his thoughts, and followed the instructions with the diligence of a student who believes the method is the point. And here was this woman, this ordinary, untrained, unordained woman, who had been sitting in the courtyard longer than he had been alive, doing nothing, calling it nothing, and looking more at peace than anyone he had met inside the temple walls. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "While we sit, we can be with our breathing, we can let go of tensions, and we can have peace." He did not say, "While we meditate correctly, using the proper method, with the right posture and the right intention, we can have peace." He said, "While we sit." That is all the old woman was doing. She was sitting, and the sitting was enough. Not because it was special, because she had stopped asking it to be. The fog thinned. The first sunlight came through, not all at once, but in stages, the way understanding comes. One layer of mist dissolving at a time. It touched the stone bench where the old woman sat, warming the grey surface until it was almost silver. It touched the plum tree and lit the bark until the ridges glowed. It touched the monk's face, and he closed his eyes, and for a moment he was not trying to do anything at all. The old woman stood, slowly the way old bodies stand, gathering themselves first, then rising. She brushed the fog from her sleeves. She walked out of the courtyard without looking back, her sandals making soft sounds on the stone, and the bench sat empty in the new light, holding the warmth of where she had been. Ajahn Chah, the Thai forest monk who taught with the simplicity of a man who had seen through everything complicated, once said, "Learn to let go without struggle. Simply let go. To be just as you are. No holding on. No attachment. Free. Perhaps freedom is not something you find at the end of a long search. Perhaps it is what is already here when you stop searching. The way the crickets were already singing before the woman on the porch stopped thinking long enough to hear them. The way the fog was already lifting before the monk stopped trying to understand it. Right now, you are lying here. You do not need to breathe correctly. Your body is already breathing. You do not need to think the right thoughts. Your mind will think whatever it thinks, and that is fine. You do not need to be calm or peaceful or ready for sleep. You only need to be here. And you are already here. You have been here this whole time. There is a word for this steadiness, upekkha. In the old Pali, it means equanimity. But it is not the cold, detached equanimity of someone who does not care. It is the equanimity of a lake that still reflects the sky, even when the wind blows. The surface ripples, the image bends. But the lake does not stop being a lake. It does not try to be a river, or an ocean, or a pond. It does not panic when the wind comes. It simply holds what it can hold, and lets the rest move through. And when the wind passes, as all wind passes, the surface settles, and the sky appears again, clear and whole. You are the lake, the thoughts are the wind, and the sky, the vast, quiet, unchanging sky, is already being reflected in you, whether you can see it or not. Let us rest here. The crickets are singing. The bench is warm. The fog has lifted, and you are here. Not becoming anything, not going anywhere, not needing to be anyone other than the person lying in this bed, breathing this breath, living this moment, which is the only moment there is. When you are ready, we will continue together. Our journey tonight is nearly complete. What remains is not a new teaching or a new story, but a quiet return, a looking back at everything we have traveled through tonight, and a looking forward to the sleep that has been waiting for you, patient and unhurried. All along, we have come to the end of our journey tonight, and what a journey it has been. Though we have not moved from this bed, though the room around you is the same room it was 3 hours ago, though nothing in the world has changed except, perhaps, something very small and very quiet inside you. Tonight, we met a woman who watched leaves fall by a lake and learned that her thoughts did not need to be stopped, only seen. We sat with a baker who stood in her dark kitchen, with her hands on the counter, saying goodbye to 25 years of bread. We met a grandmother who lay awake making plans for a daughter she could not fix, and a fisherman who let the waves come without gripping anything. We held letters from patients with a woman who did not know she had been enough. We watched a seamstress sew, and a woman write a letter to a mother who would never read it, and a man plant a tree for a son who might never sit beneath it. We walked through an empty house with a woman who discovered that her home had been changing every single day she lived in it. We stood in a rice field with an old woman who had seen 60 harvests and never once known what the next one would bring. And we sat on a stone bench in the fog with a woman who did not meditate, who just sat. They were ordinary people. They did not know they were teaching anything. The way you are living, right now, tonight, in this bed, in this body, in this unremarkable and extraordinary moment. Do you remember the monkey? The one who jumped from branch to branch all night long, not because anything was chasing it, but simply because that is what it had always done? It stopped, eventually, not on any special branch, not because it found the right answer or the right technique. It stopped because it was tired and because The tiredness finally became louder than the habit. And because the branch it was already holding was enough. Your mind has been jumping tonight. Perhaps it is still jumping. And that is all right. But perhaps, after 3 hours of stories, it has slowed down just a little. Not stopped, just slowed. The way a river slows when it reaches a wide, flat stretch of land. Not because anything is blocking it, but because there is room finally to spread out and be still. The monkey is still on its branch. The leaves are still falling. The crickets are still singing. And you are still here. That has not changed. That is the one thing that has not changed all night. You here, breathing. And you have done enough today. Not almost enough. Not enough considering the circumstances. Just enough. The way a breath is enough. Not because it accomplishes something, but because it is the only thing happening, and it is complete. You do not need to have been more patient today. You do not need to have been more productive, or more present, or more kind. You do not need to have said the right thing to the right person at the right time. You were a person, living a day, doing what you could with what you had. And that, all of it, the whole imperfect, messy, ordinary, beautiful day, is enough. It was always enough. The measuring was the only thing that said otherwise. And the measuring was never the truth. The truth is simpler. You showed up. You lived it. And now it is done. And you can rest in a house, in a small town, where the street lights went off at midnight. And the only light after that came from the moon. A woman woke up. She was 65 years old. She was a grandmother. She had lived in this town her whole life. Had gone to school here, married here, raised her daughter here, buried her husband here, and watched her daughter leave here, and come back here and leave again. Each time a little more grown. Each time a little less hers. Her granddaughter was sleeping in the room next door, 7 years old, visiting for the week, sprawled across the guest bed in that boneless way that only children sleep. Arms flung wide, mouth slightly open, breathing the deep, untroubled breath of someone who has not yet learned to worry about tomorrow. The woman lay in bed for a few minutes, listening. The house was so quiet, she could hear the clock in the kitchen, not ticking exactly, but humming, the way old electric clocks hum, a sound so constant it becomes part of the silence rather than a break in it. She could hear her granddaughter's breathing through the wall, soft, rhythmic, a tiny bellows, working steadily in the dark. She was not worried. She was not sad. She was not replaying anything, or rehearsing anything, or trying to solve anything. She was simply awake, the way you are sometimes awake for no reason, as if the body has surfaced from sleep to check on something and forgotten what it was checking on. She got up. The floor was cold. The old hardwood that her husband had refinished the summer before he got sick, sanding it by hand, because he said machines did not know how to listen to the grain. She walked down the hallway in her bare feet, past the photographs she could not see in the dark, but knew by heart, past the room where her granddaughter was breathing, past the bathroom with its dripping faucet that she kept meaning to fix and kept not fixing, because the dripping had become a kind of company. In the kitchen, she filled the kettle. The water from the tap was cold and clear, and it made a hollow sound against the metal. She set it on the stove and turned the burner on, and the blue flame appeared, small, steady, the only color in the dark kitchen. She leaned against the counter and waited. The window above the sink was open, and the night air came in. Cool, carrying the scent of grass and the faint sweetness of the neighbor's garden, where something was always blooming, season after season, as if the garden did not know how to stop. The moon was full. It sat above the rooftops like something placed there deliberately. Not floating, not hanging, just there, solid and bright, turning the yard into a landscape of silver and shadow. The oak tree by the fence cast a pattern on the grass that looked like lace, and the pattern moved slightly when the wind moved, and the wind moved so gently that the movement looked like breathing. The kettle began to hum. She poured the water over a tea bag. Chamomile. The same kind she had been drinking before bed for 20 years. The same kind her mother used to drink. The same kind she now made for her granddaughter when the girl could not sleep. The steam rose and curled and disappeared. The tea smelled like fields and honey, and something older than both. She carried the cup to the small table by the window and sat down. The chair was wooden, straight-backed, the kind that is not comfortable, but is honest. It holds you without pretending to be soft. She wrapped both hands around the cup and felt the heat move through her palms, through her fingers, up her wrists. The moon watched through the window. The clock hummed. The night breathed, and she sat there, and she let the memories come. Not in order, not as a story, just as they were, scattered, overlapping, some sharp and some soft, some painful and some so beautiful they hurt in a different way. She remembered the year her husband painted the kitchen yellow because she had said once that she liked the color of sunflowers. He had gotten paint on his eyebrows, and she had laughed so hard she had to sit down. She remembered the night her daughter was born, the strange, animal fear of it, the exhaustion, the moment they placed the baby on her chest and the world contracted to the size of a single face. She remembered the funeral, not the service, but the drive home afterward, that alone in the car. Alone in the car, and the way the radio had been playing a song she did not know, and she had pulled over and sat in the parking lot of a grocery store and cried until the song was over. She remembered the night she sold the store, the small gift shop she had run for 15 years, the one with the wind chimes by the door and the cat who slept in the window. She remembered locking the door for the last time and standing on the sidewalk and not knowing who she was without the key in her hand. She remembered the worry. Years of it, decades. Worry for her daughter, worry for her mother, worry about money and health, and whether the roof would last another winter. She remembered the nights she had lain awake, just like tonight, with a chest full of plans that would not wait until morning. And she remembered the moments of grace. The word came to her unbidden, and it was the right word. The afternoon, her granddaughter fell asleep in her lap, and she had sat perfectly still for an hour, rather than disturb her. The morning she woke up after the worst year of her life, and noticed that the sunlight on the bedroom wall was exactly the same shade of gold it had always been, and that nothing, not the grief, not the fear, not the loneliness, had changed the color of the light. The evening, she sat on the porch with a friend, and neither of them spoke for 20 minutes, and it was the best conversation she had had all year. All of it, every bit of it. The loss, and the laughter, and the worry, and the letting go, and the holding on, and the slow, reluctant learning that she could not control any of it, had brought her here, to this kitchen, to this chair, to this cup of tea, and this full moon, and this quiet night, where her granddaughter was breathing in the next room, and the clock was humming, and the wind was moving through the oak tree, and she was alive. She was alive, and she was sitting here, and she did not need to call it anything. Not meditation, not wisdom, not acceptance, not peace. She called it a quiet night. That was all. A quiet night, with tea and moonlight, and the sound of a child sleeping. And that was enough. The tea cooled in her hands. The moon shifted, so slowly that she could not see it move. But when she looked again, the silver pattern on the floor had changed shape. The lace of the oak tree had rearranged itself into something new. She finished the tea. She rinsed the cup in the sink, set it upside down on the towel to dry. She walked back down the hallway, past the photographs, past the breathing child, into her room. She lay down. The pillow took her head. The quilt settled over her. The moonlight found her through the curtain and lay across her like a hand. If this brought you some peace tonight, you are welcome to subscribe for more long-form audio like this, and share it with anyone who could use a slower night. Original commentary, stories, and script written and produced by Moonlit Dharma. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. And now, as the stories settle and the words grow quieter, let us turn our attention to the body. This body that has been carrying you all day and is ready now to be carried. Perhaps you have noticed that your shoulders have already begun to drop. Not because you told them to. You did not need to tell them. They have been listening to these stories too. And somewhere in the listening, they remembered how to let go of the day. They are softer now than they were 3 hours ago. That is not something you did. That is something that happened on its own. The way leaves fall, the way rivers slow. The jaw, too, may have softened. That place where so many of us hold the words we did not say. The tension of keeping things in, of biting down on frustration or worry, or the urge to speak when speaking would not help. Perhaps the jaw has loosened its grip just a little. Perhaps the teeth have parted. Perhaps the tongue has settled against the bottom of the mouth, resting there like a small animal that has finally found a warm place to sleep. Your hands, wherever they are, however they are resting, may feel heavier than they did when we began. Not the heaviness of burden, the heaviness of arrival, the heaviness of a body that has stopped reaching and started receiving. The fingers may have uncurled. The palms may have opened. This is not something you need to create or maintain. It is simply what hands do when they are no longer needed. They rest. They open. They let go of whatever they were holding, even if it was only the idea that they should be holding something. And the breath, your breath, which has been with you through every story tonight, which has been rising and falling beneath the words, like a tide beneath a boat. Your breath is still here. It does not need your supervision. It does not need your management. It has been breathing you this whole time. In and out, steady and faithful and completely uninterested in whether you are awake or asleep. It will carry on either way. It will carry on. And your feet, those faithful, forgotten travelers who carried you through every room and every errand and every small journey of the day, they are resting now. The arches have softened. The toes have uncurled. They do not need to take you anywhere else tonight. Every step they needed to take has been taken, And the last step brought you here, to this bed, to this stillness, to this moment where nothing is required of them, except to be warm and still and done. Feel the weight of your whole body now, not piece by piece, all of it, all at once. The full weight of you, pressing into the mattress, being held. You are heavier than you think, not in a way that is a problem, in a way that is a comfort. You are here, you are solid, you are real. And the mattress is holding every ounce of you without strain, without complaint, without condition. It was made for this. And so, tonight, were you. The pillow holds your head the way the earth holds a stone that has been rolling downhill for a long time and has finally come to rest in a valley. Not stuck, not trapped, just settled, just arrived. The blanket lies across you like a second skin, warm and familiar, rising and falling with your breath, as if it, too, were alive, as if it, too, were breathing. The night is deep now, deeper than it was when we began. The stories have settled into the quiet, the way snow settles onto a field, softly, silently, covering everything, with a thin layer of stillness. The woman by the lake is sleeping. The baker's hands are resting. The fisherman is breathing with the waves. The old woman on the stone bench has gone home. The grandmother in the kitchen has finished her tea. And the moon, the same moon that watched over all of them, the same moon that has been moving slowly across the sky. While we talked, the moon is still here. It does not hurry. It does not try to be the sun. It only reflects what it receives. And it offers that reflection to anyone who looks up. And it asks nothing in return. You are like the moon tonight. You do not need to generate your own light. You do not need to be bright or brilliant or blazing. You only need to be here, reflecting whatever is true. Letting the night do what the night has always done. Hold you, carry you, bring you closer to morning, one breath at a time. The stories are finished, but the quiet is not. The quiet will go on. Longer than the stories, longer than the night, longer than anything that has a beginning. The quiet was here before the first word, and it is here now, and it will be here after the last thought has risen and fallen and dissolved like mist above a lake at dawn. And you are inside that quiet now. You have been inside it this whole time. The stories were not taking you somewhere new. They were showing you where you already were. Here, in the dark, in the body, in the breath, in the ancient and ordinary miracle of being alive on a night when sleep would not come, and so you lay still and listened and let the world be gentle with you. Somewhere in a house very much like this one, an old woman is sleeping with her hands open on the pillow. Somewhere a baker is dreaming of flour. Somewhere a fisherman is lying in a boat that is not moving. And the stars above him are the same stars that are above you. And the darkness that holds him is the same darkness that holds you, and neither of you is alone. The crickets are still singing, outside somewhere. The wind is still moving through the trees. The moon is still crossing the sky in its slow, unhurried arc, and your body is still being held by the bed, by the blanket, by the weight of a night that is almost over and a morning that is almost here. Let your eyes close, if they have not already. Let the lids grow heavy. Let the last image in your mind be something soft. The moonlight on the kitchen floor, the plum tree in the fog, the old woman's hands wrapped around a cup of tea, the leaves falling slowly past a window, one by one by one. You do not need to sleep. You do not need to try. You only need to lie here and breathe. And let the night carry you wherever it is going. It knows the way. It has always known the way. And wherever it takes you, whether to sleep or to a deeper kind of rest that has no name, you will be safe. You are safe now. You have always been safe. And the night is not something to endure. It is something to rest inside of. The way a child rests inside a story. The way a river rests inside its banks. The way the moon rests inside the sky. Without ever needing to ask whether it belongs there. It belongs there. And you belong here, right now. Just like this.